Ava stood at the edge of the basement stairs, her breath fogging in the summer heat. The rest of the house was humid, thick with the smell of mildew and aged pine. But down there, it was different. Down there, it smelled metallic, like rusted iron mixed with something sharper. Copper. Blood. She didn't want to go down, not really, but the dreams had returned, burning ones. Screams inside her skull. And when she finally opened the trap door to the basement, she swore she heard a voice whisper, "It's time." Each step creaked underfoot, moaning like something long buried. The light bulb above flickered violently before giving up entirely, leaving her to navigate the darkness with only her phone's flashlight. She regretted it instantly. The beam cut through the shadows to reveal walls slick with condensation that smelled like rotting meat. Cold drops rained down onto her shoulders as if the ceiling itself were weeping. A draft wrapped around her ankles, cold, damp, and breathing. It wasn't air. It was too rhythmic, too human. She turned the corner, and there it was. The door. Iron, thick as a vault, framed by crumbling stone. A tarnished plaque had nearly corroded off its bolts, but she could still make out the inscription. The candle. Room. The letters were etched deep as if clawed into the metal. A rusted chain was wrapped tightly across it, held in place by a padlock so old the metal had blistered and flaked like scabbed skin. Ava reached out to touch it. The iron was freezing. Even in the thick summer air, it bit into her fingers with a sting that pulsed up her arm and into her chest. Her phone buzzed in her hand, an alarm she hadn't set. 3:33 a.m., the witching hour. She gasped, nearly dropping the device when the chain rattled. Not from her touch, no, it shivered on its own, like something on the other side had exhaled. She backed away, bile rising in her throat. The air was thick with something that tasted like old smoke and sour milk. Her tongue felt heavy, her teeth coated with something gritty, like ash. Then came the sound again. Soft, too soft. A whisper from behind the door. "Are you ready to burn?" Panic surged in her chest, but her feet wouldn't move. She was transfixed, like the room had placed invisible hooks in her skin and reeled her forward. And then, just as quickly, the sound stopped. The basement fell eerily silent. The air warmed. The bile in her mouth faded. The chain stopped rattling. The dread slipped from her shoulders like a shed coat. She let out a shaky laugh. "Jesus, get it together, Ava," she muttered. Maybe she was losing it. Stress from the inheritance, the death, the house. But when she turned back toward the stairs, her light caught something just beneath the plaque. Strange symbol carved into the stone, long faded but unmistakable. A circle of wax etched into the foundation, surrounded by smaller runes she didn't recognize. She pulled out her phone again, snapping a photo. Later she'd reverse image search it, but her fingers trembled as she zoomed in, and noticed something horrifying. The wax wasn't just old, it was fresh, dripping, slowly, from the carving. Like the stone itself was bleeding molten candlelight. Her head began to spin, the air growing thick again, this time with the sickly sweet scent of burning fat. Memories not her own began to flood her mind. Children screaming, matches striking, fire consuming something alive. She clutched her temples as visions tore through her. Figures in black robes, holding candles shaped like human heads, chanting in a forgotten tongue. A girl strapped to a wooden chair, eyes wide, mouth gagged, her skin blistering under flame. And then, just silence, not peace, vacancy. Ava fell to her knees, gasping. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her heart raced so violently it hurt. She was shaking, sobbing, and yet somewhere in her mind a voice whispered, "You've seen what the wax remembers." She crawled back toward the stairs. The walls now dripped more than water. They oozed a thick, sticky substance the color of jaundiced skin. It trailed in pulsing rivulets along the concrete, and wherever it touched, the material seemed to rot. Mold bloomed instantly, dark and veined like black lungs. One section of wall convulsed, letting out a muffled groan. Ava scrambled upward, her palms slapping wet steps, legs slipping beneath her. Finally, she burst into the kitchen, slamming the trap door shut. She locked it with 3 chairs, pushed the fridge over it, and collapsed onto the floor. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time twisted here. The morning sun eventually crept in through the windows, making the shadows recede and the nausea retreat. She tried to tell herself it had all been a hallucination, sleep deprivation, trauma, something rational, something safe. Please let it be safe. She opened her laptop and searched for local legends. She found them buried in an obscure blog from 2009. The Candle Room was part of the Braywick Fire Circle, a failed ritual society from the 1900s who believed flame was a gateway to memory. Locals say they tried to burn time backward, but unleashed something called the Hollow Wick. She read on, horrified. The ritual was only to be performed once a generation, and if interrupted, it would continue seeking a new keeper. The last known attempt had ended in a fire that killed 7 children and 1 priestess. The room had been sealed with salt, bone, and wax. Salt. She remembered seeing an empty sack of it in the basement, torn open. The barrier was broken. She had broken it. A sudden knock startled her, once, then twice. Not from the door, from beneath the floorboards. Her blood turned to ice. Her phone buzzed again. No messages, just a photo notification. Confused, she checked the gallery. Her phone had taken a new photo of the candle carving. But something had changed in the image. The runes were now glowing, and there, reflected faintly in the sheen of wax, was her own face. But her eyes were gone. The house groaned with age. It wasn't just the wind or the old wood shifting. It was deeper, a sound that came from inside the walls, like the groan of something ancient trying to stretch after centuries of stillness. Ava stood in the center of the living room, eyes darting across the faded wallpaper. It peeled in curling sheets, revealing crumbling plaster beneath. The pattern, golden lilies, was stained with streaks of reddish brown. Not rust, something darker, something more human. She hadn't wanted to stay the night. The air was wrong, thick, with dust and the sharp, nose-burning tang of mold. But the will had been clear. She was to spend 1 full night in her grandmother's home before she could sell it. She was the last heir. No one else had dared set foot in it for years. Locals called it the Wick House and crossed themselves when passing. Some even spat. Ava had laughed it off. Superstition, rural nonsense. But the moment she crossed the threshold, her laughter had died on her lips. It was cold. Not in temperature, though that was bad enough, but in spirit. The walls pulsed with it. Her fingers tingled every time she brushed against the cracked wood of the banister or leaned too close to a wall. Cold, dry, hungry. The floorboards creaked under her steps like reluctant sighs. A low hum seemed to pulse beneath everything. Not quite a sound. More like a sensation in her bones, vibrating quietly, making her stomach churn. Ava lit a candle. The old power lines barely worked, flickering off and on like a nervous tick. She walked slowly through the house, each footstep echoing with more volume than it should. The hallway smelled like wet dog, copper, and something much worse. A sickly sweet scent that stuck to her tongue like rotten sugar. She gagged and covered her nose, but it clung to her, oily and dense. She passed the dining room and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror above the mantel. Only, it wasn't quite her. Her reflection blinked a second too late. Its smile was too wide. She looked away, heart pounding. "Get a grip," she whispered, clutching the candle like it was a lifeline. The flame sputtered in her hand, dancing erratically despite the still air. In the study, she found a box beneath a pile of yellowed books. Dust exploded into the air as she opened it, making her cough violently. Inside were blackened journals wrapped in string. Each one was bound in cracked leather, brittle with age and something else, stained. She flipped through the first few pages and froze. They were written in her grandmother's tight cursive. The entries began innocently. Garden plans, recipes, odd dreams. Then the dates skipped. Weeks, then months. And then came the drawings. A figure. Repeated on page after page. Tall, robed, with a face made of melting wax. No eyes. Just dripping hollows where they should have been. Below the drawings were rituals. Lists. Of ingredients she didn't recognize. Goat marrow. Infant ash. Hollow bark. Human wax. In the margins were phrases scrawled over and over. Do not feed the flame. Do not speak the name. Do not light the wick. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the house. A loud, heavy thud from upstairs. Ava jumped, clutching the journal to her chest. Silence followed, then creaking. Footsteps, one after another, slow and deliberate. She held her breath, listening. The steps reached the top of the stairs and then stopped. The candle flickered, wildly. A whisper followed. You've read the name. She dropped the journal, heart hammering. The air thickened around her. Her skin crawled, damp with sweat despite the cold. The wallpaper on the far wall began to bubble, slowly, blistering like skin in fire. Then it popped, oozing a dark red sludge that dripped to the floor with soft, sickening plops. She stumbled backward into the hallway. The footsteps resumed. Then, nothing. Silence. Returned. Just like that. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. The air grew calm again. She even laughed, shakily. Old house, bad wiring, nerves. She convinced herself it was done. A one-time scare. The kind of thing that happens in creepy houses and anxious minds. For a moment, she felt almost silly. Then she heard the breathing. Low. Deep. Wet. It was coming from inside the walls. She backed. Away, the candle now trembling in her hand. She fled to the kitchen, heart racing, and turned on the faucet, trying to distract herself. But the water ran brown, thick, sludgy, and warm. A rotting smell wafted up, like sulfur and iron and bile. She screamed and shut it off. In the pantry, she found more signs. Old symbols carved into the wooden beams, crude circles of ash, salt, and melted wax on the floor. Inside one, a tiny blackened finger bone. She stumbled away, choking back vomit. She ran outside. Moonlight bathed the front yard. The cool air was a relief. Crickets chirped. An owl hooted. Normal, ordinary. Her heart slowed. Maybe she could sleep in the car. Maybe this was enough to satisfy the will. One night after all. One night in the house. She could call a lawyer. Pay someone to stay in her place. Her hands stopped shaking. Then she saw them. Dozens of candles, lit, burning in the windows of the house. Every window, flickering in synchronized rhythm, and behind them, shadows, tall, still, watching. Ava couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her legs refused to listen. From behind her, a voice like dripping wax said, "The wick remembers, and now it burns in you." Ava woke to the sound of something scratching. Not loud, faint, like nails against wood. The kind of sound you could ignore if you were still half asleep. But Ava was wide awake. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her eyes opened in the pitch dark. The candle had burned out. The scent of melted wax hung heavy in the air, mingled with something metallic, copper and rot. The room was cold. Not just cold, dead. The kind of chill that sinks into your bones, that makes your teeth hurt and your lungs sting. The bedsheets were damp beneath her, like someone had poured lukewarm water over the mattress. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth, tasting bile and something sweet, like syrup gone bad. The smell of decay had intensified, curling up her nostrils until she gagged. The scratching continued, soft, steady, from inside the walls. Ava sat up. The wooden headboard was slick beneath her palm. She recoiled. The wood was wet. A greasy film clung to her skin. She wiped it on the blanket, but the texture didn't go away. It followed her, clung to her fingertips like oil. The room creaked and something shifted in the shadows. She reached for her phone. Dead. even though it had been fully charged before she slept. Panic prickled up her spine. "Okay," she whispered, trying to steady her breath. "It's just old wood. Old plumbing. Nothing supernatural." That was when the whisper came. It was right behind her ear. One word, breathed more than spoken. "Ava!" She screamed and jumped out of bed, nearly tripping over the torn rug. The floor beneath her feet felt soft, almost spongy, as though the wood was rotting from within. She rushed to the window. Shut. Nailed shut. Her breath fogged the glass, and on the other side, she saw a smear. A single greasy handprint, from the inside. For a moment she stood frozen, fists clenched, heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Then everything stopped. The house went still, silent. False calm returned. The air grew warmer, as if nothing had happened. The shadows receded slightly. The whispering ceased. Even the smell of rot faded, replaced by the mustiness of old curtains and dust. It was almost enough to fool her. Almost. But Ava had seen the handprint. She knew what she'd heard. And when she glanced down at the floor, she saw tiny wax footprints. Leading out of her room, she followed them, barefoot, careful, clutching a broken candlestick like a weapon. The wax prints led her down the hallway. Every board creaked under her weight. But some made wet sounds, like something squelched beneath the wood. The walls trembled with each step, as if breathing. The old wallpaper was darker now, stained with something that trickled downward, thick and red, like blood that had cooled and congealed. The footprints ended at a door she hadn't seen before, a small, narrow door at the end of the hallway. It wasn't there yesterday. Ava blinked. It was unmistakably real now. A black iron knob, painted red symbols crusted around the frame. She hesitated, then opened it. The smell hit her like a wall, burnt flesh, candle smoke. Copper. Inside, the room was small and circular. A single stool stood in the middle, surrounded by melted candles, hundreds of them, all burned down to nubs. Their wax had pooled and hardened in fleshy mounds, some resembling faces. Twisted, screaming. Above the stool, hanging from rusty chains, was a mirror, cracked, and inside it, not her reflection, something else. Waxen, tall, faceless. Then it moved. She stumbled back and stepped on something sharp, a small wooden box. She picked it up with trembling hands. Inside were photos, old, black and white, people tied to chairs, candles placed around them, symbols carved into their foreheads, eyes missing. The same robe appeared in every photo, worn by a towering figure in the background. No face, just dripping wax. A voice echoed in her head. Not her own. Ancient. "They tried to burn me away. Fire only made me strong." She dropped the box. Her hands were bleeding. Her fingernails had split from clenching so tightly. The pain didn't register. Not really. Ava fled the room. But the house had changed. The hallway was longer. Too long. The walls bled freely now. Thick, syrupy streams running from the ceiling to the floor. The wood beneath her feet groaned with wet rot. Whispers filled the air. Dozens of them, overlapping, impossible to distinguish. A chorus of madness. She turned a corner and walked into herself. Not a mirror. Another her. Standing still, face slack, mouth open. Wax ran from the corners of her eyes like tears. Then, it melted into the floor. She dropped to her knees, sobbing. "Make it stop, please. Make it stop." She remembered the local stories now. The ones her grandmother whispered when she thought Ava was asleep. Stories of the Wick Man. A spirit born from a wronged priest centuries ago, burned for heresy. They said he lived in the wax. That when you burned a candle, you lit the path for him. That the only way to stop him was never to light the last candle. Ava had lit that last candle when she first arrived. A small, hand-dipped thing she'd found. In the drawer. She hadn't thought it meant anything. Now the house was alive. Feeding. Ava crawled into the dining room. The lights flickered, then stayed on. The bleeding stopped. The air cleared. For a moment, The horror seemed to lift. She sat against the wall, crying, exhausted. The mirror above the fireplace reflected only her now, just her. Then she saw her own reflection smile. Her body didn't move, but the reflection did. It raised its hand and pointed to the wall beside her. Ava turned slowly. Carved into the plaster, just inches from her head, were fresh words. "You are the next Wick." Ava's fingers trembled as she turned the brittle pages of her grandmother's journal. The candlelight cast flickering shadows, making the handwritten words dance and blur. The ink, faded and smudged, told tales of rituals and warnings. She read of the Wick Man, an entity born from ancient rites, bound by wax and flame. The journal spoke of villagers who, centuries ago, tried to contain the evil through rituals involving salt circles and chants in forgotten tongues. But each attempt only seemed to strengthen the entity's hold. The air grew thick with the scent of burning tallow and something metallic, coppery, like blood. Ava gagged, the taste of bile rising in her throat. She wiped her mouth, her hand coming, away with a smear of crimson. The walls around her seemed to pulse, the wallpaper bubbling and oozing a dark, viscous fluid. She reached out, her fingers sinking into the damp surface, the texture cold and slimy. A sudden creak echoed through the house, followed by a low whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "You lit the wick," it hissed. Ava spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The shadows danced mockingly, and the candle flickered violently. She clutched the journal to her chest, seeking solace in its pages. Determined to understand the entity's origins, Ava ventured into the attic, the stairs groaning under her weight. The air was colder here, each breath visible in the dim light. Dust motes floated lazily, disturbed by her presence. In the corner, she found a trunk, its surface covered in strange symbols carved deep into the wood. She opened it, revealing artifacts, melted candles, bones, and a mask resembling a face made of wax. The mask's hollow eyes seemed to stare into her soul. As she examined the items, a vision overtook her. She saw a village engulfed in flames, villagers chanting as they bound a figure in waxen robes. The figure's face was obscured, but its eyes burned with hatred. They lit candles around it, and as the flames consumed the wax, the figure screamed, its voice echoing through time. Ava snapped back to reality, the scream still ringing in her ears. Shaken, she descended the stairs, only to find the house transformed. The walls bled, the floorboards warped, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. She stumbled into the kitchen, where the sink overflowed with a dark, viscous liquid. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and she retched, the bile burning her throat. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Moments later, the house returned to its previous state. The walls were dry, the floorboards intact, and the air clear. Ava sat up, confusion clouding her mind. Was it a hallucination? A dream? She looked at her hands, still stained with blood, and knew it was real. The house was toying with her, offering moments of false hope before plunging her back into terror. Writing forums.com desperate, she recalled a local superstition her grandmother once mentioned: never light the last candle in the house. It was said to be the Wick Man's beacon, a signal for him to return. Ava had lit that candle upon entering, unknowingly inviting the entity back. She needed to extinguish it, to break the connection. She raced to the living room, where the candle still burned. As she approached, the flame grew, casting elongated shadows that danced around her. The air grew hotter, the scent of burning flesh overwhelming. She reached out, but an invisible force pushed her back. The candle's flame turned blue, and a voice whispered, "Too late." The room darkened, the shadows coalescing into a figure, the Wick Man. His form was ever-changing, wax dripping from his limbs, his face a void. He reached out and Ava screamed, the sound swallowed by the darkness. The last thing she saw was the candle extinguishing, plunging her into eternal night. Ava stood motionless in the center of the room, the air thick with the scent of melting wax and something more sinister, decay mingled with copper. The candlelight flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. Her skin prickled as a cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Ava. The voice was barely audible, a mere breath against her ear, yet it sent a jolt of fear through her. She spun around, but the room was empty. The shadows mocked her, shifting and twisting into grotesque forms before settling back into their original shapes. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. She took a tentative step forward, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The sound was unnerving, like a warning from the house itself. The taste of bile rose in her throat, and she swallowed hard, trying to suppress the nausea that threatened to overtake her. The walls seemed to close in, the room growing smaller, with each passing second. Why are you here? LissaHannett.com plus 16horrornovelreviews.com plus 16gq.com plus 16. The voice was louder this time, more distinct. It was not her own, nor did it belong to anyone she recognized. It was ancient, filled with sorrow and rage. She turned toward the sound, her eyes scanning the room for its source. In the corner, a figure began to materialize, a tall, faceless entity composed entirely of wax. Its form was unstable, melting and reforming with each passing moment. Ava's breath caught in her throat as the entity stepped forward, its movements fluid yet unnatural. The air grew colder, and the scent of burning tallow intensified. She backed away, her hands trembling. The entity raised an arm, pointing directly at her. "You lit the candle," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. Memories flooded her mind, her grandmother's warnings about the final candle, the stories of the wick man, the entity that fed on the souls of those who summoned it. She had dismissed them as mere folklore, tales to scare children. But now, faced with the embodiment of those stories, she realized the truth. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The wick man tilted its head, as if considering her words. "Ignorance does not absolve you," it replied. "You have awakened me, and now you must pay the price." The room began to shake, the walls bleeding wax that sizzled as it hit the floor. The temperature dropped further, her breath visible in the air. She fell to her knees, the cold seeping into her bones. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and she coughed, crimson droplets staining the floor. "Please," she begged. "There must be a way to stop this." The wick man paused, its form flickering. "There is one way," it said, "but it requires a sacrifice." Ava looked up, desperation in her eyes. "Anything," she said. Inkit.com plus 2 atmospherepress.com plus brianwalaspa.com plus 2. The entity extended its hand, revealing a small, ornate dagger. "Blood for blood," it intoned. "Only by offering your own can you hope to contain me once more." Literaryaactor.com. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment she touched it, visions assaulted her, images of past victims, their faces twisted in agony as they were consumed by flames. She saw her grandmother, younger, performing a ritual with others, chanting in a language she didn't understand. The ritual failed, the wick man emerging stronger than before. Ava recoiled, dropping the dagger. "I can't," she whispered. The wick man's form grew larger, more menacing. "Then you shall join them," it declared. The walls erupted in flames, the heat intense. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the roar of the fire. As the flames closed in, she felt herself being pulled into darkness, her consciousness fading. Ava's breath caught as she stepped into the room, the air thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood. The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls, which now seemed to ooze a dark, viscous substance. Her fingers brushed against the cold, damp surface of the doorframe, sending a shiver down her spine. Each step further into the room felt like wading through molasses, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. On the floor, partially obscured by a tattered rug, lay a small, leather-bound book. She knelt to retrieve it, the texture of the cover, rough and sticky with age. As she opened it, a cloud of dust and the acrid smell of mildew assaulted her senses, making her gag. The pages were brittle, filled with spidery handwriting and dark stains that resembled blood. The journal belonged to a man named Elias, a former resident of the house. His entries detailed a descent into madness, plagued by visions of a faceless entity and whispers that echoed through the halls. He spoke of rituals performed to appease the Wick Man, involving the lighting of candles and offerings of blood. The final entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared, as if the writer had been interrupted. As Ava read, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the room into darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant creaking of floorboards and a faint, rhythmic dripping. She fumbled for her flashlight, the beam revealing a trail of crimson leading to a hidden door in the corner. Her heart pounded as she approached, the taste of bile rising in her throat. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the earth. The air grew colder with each step, the walls damp and covered in strange symbols etched into the stone. At the bottom, she entered a chamber filled with the remnants of failed rituals, broken candles, shattered mirrors, and bones arranged in unsettling patterns. The smell of decay was overpowering, making her eyes water. In the center of the room stood an altar, upon which lay a wax effigy resembling the Wick Man. Its featureless face seemed to watch her, and as she stepped closer, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. She reached out to touch the effigy, her fingers sinking into the soft wax, which felt disturbingly warm. A sudden jolt of pain shot through her hand, and she recoiled, blood dripping from a fresh cut. The room began to shake, the walls bleeding, as the whispers turned to screams. Ava stumbled back, her vision blurring as the chamber seemed to close in around her. She turned to flee, but the staircase had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. Panic set in, her breaths coming in shallow gasps as she searched for an escape. Suddenly, the noise ceased, and the room returned to its previous state. The staircase reappeared, and the bleeding walls dried. Ava hesitated, unsure if she was hallucinating or if the house was playing tricks on her. She ascended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, her mind racing with questions. Back in the candle room, she noticed a new entry in Elias's journal, dated the current day. The handwriting matched hers, and the words described events that had just transpired. Her hands trembled as she read the final line. The Wick Man watches, waiting for the flame to be lit once more. She dropped the journal, a cold dread settling over her. As she turned to leave, the candle reignited on its own, the flame burning a deep, unnatural blue. The shadows coalesced into the form of the Wick Man, his featureless face inches from hers. Ava's scream was swallowed by the darkness as the room consumed her, leaving only the flickering candle behind. Ava emerged into a corridor unlike the others, long, narrow, and lined with dozens of antique mirrors. Each one was veiled with a thin layer of dust, but none reflected her image. The only sound was the rhythmic creak of the old wooden floor beneath her boots, broken occasionally by a faint whisper that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Not one whisper, but hundreds, overlapping, hissing her name. The air here was colder, heavy. It clung to her skin like wet cloth. The faint coppery scent of old blood hung in the air, mingling with something fouler, something like rotting meat wrapped in wax paper and forgotten for weeks. She gagged as she moved forward, her fingers brushing one of the mirror frames. It felt strangely warm, slick. She yanked her hand back. It glistened red. Blood. She turned to leave, but the hallway had grown longer, much longer. Panicked, she began to run. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. With each step, the whispers grew louder, now forming disjointed sentences. She sees, she wakes, she bleeds the flame. Their voices weren't human anymore. She stopped. One mirror had fogged unlike the rest. She approached it slowly, eyes wide. The fog swirled and formed an image. Not hers, but a girl in 19th century dress. Her hair was scorched at the ends. Her lips were sewn shut with black thread. The girl pointed at Ava and mouthed a word over and over. "Run!" Ava screamed and fell backward. The mirror cracked. A wave of nausea rolled over her. Her stomach lurched, bile burning her throat. She tried to stand, but her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts thick like molasses. The hallway pulsed. The walls shimmered. She blinked hard. Suddenly, everything was calm again. Silence. The hallway shortened. The air cleared. She touched her chest. Her heart was racing, but she was still alive. The mirrors no longer bled. One even showed her reflection again. False. "Hope," a low moan echoed behind her. Ava spun around. The girl from the mirror now stood at the end of the hall. This time her lips were gone entirely. Skin stretched taut where they should have been. She held something in her hand. A journal. Ava didn't know why, but she stepped forward. The girl opened the book. As Ava approached, she could make out scrawled writing. "The Hall of Breaths binds the souls of those who sought to smother the flame." Beneath it, an illustration of the Wick Man, larger, darker, surrounded by dozens of women with hollow eyes and bleeding mouths. One detail chilled her. Above the creature's head, the phrase, "born from breath, sustained by silence." The entity wasn't just some spirit, it was created. A thing born from ritualistic silence, kept alive by the absence of screams. And those mirrors? Not mirrors. They were prisons, each one a soul. Her legs trembled. The girl disappeared, but the journal remained in her hands. She flipped to the last page. "If one screams in the hall, the Wick Man breathes again." A loud crack shattered the moment. One of the mirrors exploded, shards raining down, slicing her cheek. Blood dripped from the cut. She screamed. Everything shifted. The walls pulsed and bled, the color of rust and midnight. From the gashes in the wallpaper oozed thick, black ichor. The whispers returned, no longer voices, but howling wind tearing at her mind. The mirrors began to warp and ripple like disturbed water. Faces pushed through, contorted, screaming silently. Hands banged from the other side. Some still bore stitched lips. Others had no eyes. Each begged for release, or vengeance. Ava stumbled backward, fell. The floor below her split open. She landed in a crawlspace beneath the house, chest deep in water that smelled like bile and iron. Floating beside her, bones, dozens, small, child-sized. Each had something carved into the skull, a symbol. The same one from the altar, the same one burned into her wrist. Her sanity cracked. She laughed, then sobbed, then did both. Above her, something creaked, a rope. It lowered slowly into the hole, a noose soaked in oil. And she remembered. The local legend, a children's rhyme, the one the townspeople whispered but never spoke aloud at night. Light the wick, but never two. He'll come for me, he'll come for you. Breath you take and scream you save, feeds the man who guards the grave. It was never just a tale, the village knew. The elders tried rituals, blood offerings, candle burnings, silent fasts, but the entity always returned, hungrier, more cunning. And now it had her. Ava reached into the water. Her hand closed around something hard. Another candle, black as pitch, still warm. She stared at it, mind reeling. If she lit it, would it bind the Wick Man again? Or release him completely? A sudden gust blew through the crawlspace. The candle flared to life in her palm. Without a spark, the walls groaned. The mirrors above shattered all at once, and behind her, a sound she'd never forget. Breathing, deep, slow, wet. The candle sputtered, dimmed. She turned. There was something crawling toward her, not walking, slithering, a mass of wax, blood, and bone, eyes like melted candles, mouths, dozens, each sewn shut, but twitching violently. It opened one of its mouths and whispered in her voice, "Come closer." She dropped. The candle. The light went out. Darkness. Then a hand gripped her ankle. Ava's eyes fluttered open to a suffocating darkness. The air was thick, saturated with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood. Her throat burned with the acrid taste of bile, and her skin prickled against the cold, damp stone beneath her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant, rhythmic dripping of water echoing through unseen corridors. She sat up slowly, her fingers brushing against the rough, slimy surface of the floor. The texture was unsettling, like flesh stretched over bone. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper caressed her ears, growing louder with each passing moment. It was her name, repeated over and over, distorted and overlapping, as if spoken by countless voices. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she stood, her legs trembling beneath her. The darkness seemed to pulse around her, alive and watching. She reached out, her hands encountering a wall slick with moisture. As she moved forward, the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices screaming in agony. Suddenly, a dim light flickered ahead, a single candle burning atop a stone pedestal. She approached cautiously, the light revealing a chamber, filled with grotesque murals depicting scenes of torture and sacrifice. The walls wept blood, the crimson liquid pooling on the floor. On the pedestal lay a tattered journal, its cover stained and torn. Ava picked it up, the pages brittle beneath her fingers. The entries detailed the descent of a man named Elias into madness, plagued by visions of a faceless entity and whispers that echoed through the halls. He spoke of rituals performed to appease the Wick Man, involving the lighting of candles and offerings of blood. The final entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if the writer had been interrupted. As she read, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the chamber into darkness once more. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Ava stumbled backward, her foot catching on something solid. She looked down to see a skeletal hand reaching out from the floor, its fingers curled in a silent plea. Panic surged through her as she turned to flee, only to find the entrance sealed by a wall of flesh pulsating with life. The chamber was alive, feeding off her fear. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Then, silence. Ava opened her eyes to find herself lying on the floor of the candle room, the journal clutched in her hands. The candle burned steadily, casting a warm glow. The walls were clean, the murals gone. It was as if nothing had happened. But the taste of bile lingered in her mouth, and the whispers echoed in her mind. She stood, her body aching, and made her way to the door. As she reached for the handle, a voice whispered in her ear, "You cannot escape." Ava turned, but the room was empty. She fled the house, the whispers following her into the night. Ava's eyes fluttered open to a suffocating darkness. The air was thick, saturated with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood. Her throat burned with the acrid taste of bile, and her skin prickled against the cold, damp stone beneath her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant, rhythmic dripping of water echoing through unseen corridors. She sat up slowly, her fingers brushing against the rough, slimy surface of the floor. The texture was unsettling, like flesh stretched over bone. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper caressed her ears, growing louder with each passing moment. It was her name, repeated over and over, distorted and overlapping, as if spoken by countless voices. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she stood, her legs trembling beneath her. The darkness seemed to pulse around her, alive and watching. She reached out, her hands encountering a wall slick with moisture. As she moved forward, the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices screaming in agony. Suddenly, a dim light flickered ahead, a single candle burning atop a stone pedestal. She approached cautiously, the light revealing a chamber, filled with grotesque murals depicting scenes of torture and sacrifice. The walls wept blood, the crimson liquid pooling on the floor. On the pedestal lay a tattered journal, its cover stained and torn. Ava picked it up, the pages brittle beneath her fingers. The entries detailed the descent of a man named Elias into madness, plagued by visions of a faceless entity and whispers that echoed through the halls. He spoke of rituals performed to appease the Wick Man, involving the lighting of candles and offerings of blood. The final entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if the writer had been interrupted. As she read, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candle, plunging the chamber into darkness once more. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Ava stumbled backward, her foot catching on something solid. She looked down to see a skeletal hand reaching out from the floor, its fingers curled in a silent plea. Panic surged through her as she turned to flee, only to find the entrance sealed by a wall of flesh pulsating with life. The chamber was alive, feeding off her fear. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Then, silence. Ava opened her eyes to find herself lying on the floor of the candle room, the journal clutched in her hands. The candle burned steadily, casting a warm glow. The walls were clean, the murals gone. It was as if nothing had happened. But the taste of bile lingered in her mouth, and the whispers echoed in her mind. She stood, her body aching, and made her way to the door. As she reached for the handle, a voice whispered in her ear, "You cannot escape." Ava turned, but the room was empty. She fled the house, the whispers following her into the night. Ava's breath hitched as the cold metal handle twisted beneath her shaking fingers. The door creaked open with a slow, agonizing groan that echoed like a warning through the suffocating darkness beyond. A sudden wave of fetid air rolled out, thick, with the sour stench of decay, copper, and something deeper, something ancient, like the lingering breath of death itself. It clawed at her throat, making her gag, the bitter taste of bile rising at the back of her mouth, mixing with a faint, metallic tang like old dried blood. The walls behind her seemed to pulse, veins of dark crimson bleeding slowly from cracked stone, their wet sheen catching the candlelight in sickening glimmers. She stepped through the threshold, every nerve screaming in protest, but some force pushed her forward. The room beyond was vast, cavernous, lit by hundreds of candles suspended mid-air, yet their flames flickered without wind, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The floor beneath her boots was slick, a subtle layer of something cold and wet that clung to her soles. The air was alive with a chorus of whispers, barely audible at first, soft sighs, mournful chants, the scraping of unseen claws against stone, and faint, desperate cries. She wanted to block them out, but the voices burrowed deeper into her mind with every step. Ava's eyes scanned the room, settling on an altar in the center. There, a brittle yellowed parchment lay spread atop blackened wood. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. The ancient text was scrawled in an archaic script, but something inside her mind understood it without translation. The document spoke of a curse cast long ago by a forsaken cult, the Candle Keepers, who believed they could imprison a vengeful spirit by trapping it within an eternal flame. This spirit, the Wick Man, was born of a betrayal so deep and cruel that even the heavens recoiled. They wrote of sacrifices, blood rites, and the ritual lighting of candles to bind the entity's rage and hunger, but the ritual had failed. The entity, far from contained, had grown stronger in its anger and despair. The keepers themselves had vanished, swallowed by madness or death, their bones rumored to be entombed in the very walls of the house. Ava's heart thudded painfully as she looked down, suddenly noticing the ground beneath the altar was cracked, revealing a shallow pit, filled with brittle bones, the remains of those who dared defy the Wick Man. A shiver coursed through her spine. The walls began to sweat dark droplets that slid down in rivulets of blood. The candle flames sputtered violently, some guttering out, plunging parts of the room into suffocating shadows. Ava could taste it again, the coppery tang of fresh blood on her tongue, though she hadn't moved or injured herself. Her breathing grew erratic, chest tightening as panic clawed at her sanity. The whispers crescendoed into urgent warnings, then pleading, then furious curses. She staggered back, nearly tripping over cold, clammy stones that seemed to shift beneath her feet like a living thing. The floor pulsed, heartbeat-like. Her mind, fractured under the pressure. Was this real, or the cruel fabrication of a mind unraveling? She pressed trembling palms against the bleeding walls, and her fingers came away sticky, warm. A cold sweat slicked her skin, the chill of death creeping into her bones. For a fleeting moment, the voices softened. The blood stopped weeping from the walls, and the candles flickered back to steady light. Ava's heart seized in hope, a brief fragile hope that she might escape this nightmare. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, willing the sense of horror to fade. But it wasn't over. When she opened her eyes, the shadows had deepened, thick tendrils of darkness slithering along the floor and climbing the walls like living things. The air grew dense, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere conspired to crush her lungs. The whispers returned, not as voices, but as guttural growls and chilling laughter that surrounded her, filling every corner with unseen menace. Ava collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the relentless pressure on her mind and body. She recalled the stories her grandmother told, whispered warnings passed down through generations. How the Wick Man was a curse born of betrayal, bound by fire and blood, but forever hungry for the souls of those who trespassed. The villagers had tried to contain it with prayers, charms, and candlelight, but none had lasted. The evil always returned, stronger, more vengeful. No ritual could hold it back. She tasted bile again, her mouth dry and raw as she struggled to stand. The floor beneath her cracked open wider, a jagged maw revealing shadows that writhed like serpents within. From that abyss came a cold breath that brushed her face, icy fingers grazing her skin. Ava screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Her mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Was this a place, a nightmare, or something far worse? An endless prison where the candle room fed on her fear and sanity. Her reflection in a shattered mirror on the far wall showed eyes wild and hollow, skin clammy and pale, lips cracked and bleeding. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Suddenly, a candle near the altar flared into an unholy green flame, illuminating a shadowed figure emerging from the darkness. The Wick Man, tall and faceless, its form flickering like smoke, reached toward her with hands of flame and shadow. The air around him pulsed with heat and rot, a sickening blend of life and death. "You cannot leave," it whispered with a voice, like rusted chains and broken promises. "The fire binds you now." Ava's legs gave way as the chamber seemed to close in, the blood-soaked walls tightening like a noose. The last flicker of hope shattered, replaced by the raw, consuming terror of knowing her fate was sealed. The curse would continue, feeding, growing, waiting for the next to wander into the candle room's dark embrace. And somewhere, deep within the ancient house, the first candle flickered anew. The nightmare has only just begun. What price will Ava pay for crossing into the Wiki? Man's domain,